So on the stage coming up next, we are going to have the founder and former CEO of GitHub, Tom Preston-Werner. He is being joined by the co-founder of Kin Insurance, Lucas Ward, alongside with JC Glancy, who founded ZenBusiness in the US, and Jans Hilgers, who is in the esports world and founder of Fluent Ventures. And this conversation is going to be moderated by Alex Lazarow, who I mentioned is an investor in a number of those companies. So let's give it up to our unicorn founders on life after unicorn status.
Okay, last panel of the day. Excited to have the conversation together. Just one reminder for folks up top of keeping the noise levels down. This topic is close to my heart about how to take lessons learned from unicorn founders across geos and applying them to investing. It's core to the thesis of Fluent Ventures. We invest with geo arbitrage, taking proven models from proven unicorn founders across geos. We have 50 unicorn founders as part of our LP base, many of whom are on this panel. And I wrote a book called Out-Innovate, How Global Entrepreneurs from Delhi, Detroit are rewriting the rules of Silicon Valley about doing this playbook. And so I'm excited about the conversation. You guys are all unicorn founders. You've done this across different geos. What I'd love to do is start off, maybe Lucas. You get the hot seat first. You built 4 companies, the last of which is a climate fintech. You've had a bunch of different investors, generalists, fintech investors, insurtech investors. Can you talk a little bit about the role of specialization and knowledge on your cap table?
Yeah, it's probably a bit of an extreme example with Kin being an insurance company. There's a lot of extra type of capital that comes along with that. Fintech is very capital intensive in general. And we actually started our own insurance entity operating in the US after our A round, which requires a lot of different kinds of specialized capital. So there is the type of growth, Sand Hill Road, Silicon Valley, traditional venture in there, but we also had to have debt capital to actually capitalize the actual insurance entity. And if you even think about it, we actually have reinsurance, which is its own type of capital that you have to provide. And we even actually have catastrophe bonds that we issue ourselves, which you can invest in if you're interested in it. It's a great non-correlated asset class. And there's no way to do this complicated of a business like insurance, especially in Florida, Louisiana, Texas, all these other states, without having a specialist to help with these individual type of capital needs you would need in something like property insurance.
I resonate with that. And Jens, maybe to complement that, you've gone from a gaming founder to now a gaming founder of a VC fund specializing in gaming. Maybe talk about your experience and what motivated you to launch the fund.
Yeah, I mean, in the first place, I think my intent was always obviously following my passion and building products that would satisfy and delight myself. That was the origination of my founder story, loving video games and building something that I felt like would make my own experience better. Ultimately, I wanted to do that with large impact, and I felt my impact would probably be larger if I would support other founders with the experience, the network I built, and hopefully with capital at scale to like fulfill their own dreams. Sort of what I learned, like switching sides, to some extent was that sort of first off, specialization to a certain theme which is what I do, right? I specialize on just gaming, is something that also filled a need that I felt myself. I was raising capital for my games company in Germany. Germany happens to be a country that is not very appreciative of anything that's creative work to begin with. Sorry, hopefully nobody feels offended, but like we really didn't have a lot of people in Germany and don't have that truly understand video games and the creative industry behind that. And sort of finding venture capital at that point in time in the early 2000s in Europe was miserable, right? So find somebody that understands what you do. They're building esports or gaming that would be a good partner for you, your first board member potentially, that could truly help you like building something larger. I had to re-educate my boards at the time, every single time, about what the games industry was and how it functions. And I felt like that can't be all I get from a VC. That can't be all I get from that partner on the board. And so with that, switching to the venture side, I realized for myself, like I can bring so much more. And as a founder, there's going to be a lot of people that appreciate that somebody can actually spar your idea actually share stuff with you that informs you in much more profound ways than just to look at your balance sheet or your hiring process that makes you stronger, right? And I think that thesis played out. Second, when you're just in one segment, just in one industry, I think it's important to not fuck up. I think if you're like generalist, you work across different sectors, you might fuck up in biotech and you're doing better maybe in, I don't know, in robotics. But like if you're in one industry and you fuck up in that industry and in that ecosystem, your reputation gets a problem very, very quickly. So that is what I learned when I built the ecosystem in games and esports, and turning that around to like being a VC. There's something very beautiful of just not fucking up and being nice with people, and it compounds incredibly well. So I took that learning and applied that on BITKRAFT as well. And lastly, I learned that building a generational true big brand platform in VC is actually much more of an entrepreneurial challenge than what you would see from the outside. Like you actually have to take care, or should take care of, what tech do you build to run your firm effectively as you scale in capital and LPs and like portfolio potentially to stay effective and stay like core to what you want to deliver. You have to pay attention to your brand in particular that hopefully overshadows, as you build a generational platform, your own identity and your own name. So a couple of aspects that I learned that I like translated to hopefully what is a best in class, at least in our industry, VC in the game space.
I love that. And on your point on sparring partner, I think that to be able to do that effectively, it both requires the empathy, but actually the expertise around the topic to be able to have that conversation. Tom, maybe I'll switch to you. You build a leading infra company. I'd be curious your learnings on both the fundraising, how it's affected your thoughts for the future, how you think about it for investing with this lens in mind.
Yeah, coming off of GitHub, and really while I was at GitHub, I started angel investing. So I've been angel investing for 14 years almost. And really seeing a breadth of companies come through the door, like it's very interesting to see how they change over time and how the focus changes and what the founders are like and the stories that need to be told and how busy the market is. I think one of the biggest things that has changed in the software development market is really just how many players there are. And it changes everything about how these companies need to go to market, how they need to differentiate, how they need to develop a much finer skill around marketing and publicity than we did in the early GitHub days. There was almost nobody in the software tooling space when we started GitHub. And it was like we just had to build something great. There just wasn't anything great. And so anyone who came along and built something great for developers, they would win. And that is no longer the case at all. And so when I talk to founders, a lot of it really is helping them refine their differentiation, go to market. How are they going to publicize? How are they going to reach users? How are they going to build something that they know is actually solving problems? And it's a completely different landscape. And then doing some additional startup activities since GitHub, it's quite humbling to do a startup that's successful and then attempt to do it again in a different way. And you learn exactly how special certain things were that allowed that success, and being able to then develop that empathy for the startups that I invest in, having seen things from many different sides and in different geographies. I was working with one of my former co-founders at GitHub, and we were building a foreign language learning startup based in Berlin, primarily. And so building a startup in Berlin was very different from building a startup in San Francisco. In some ways, much better, and in other ways, maybe not quite as good. And so geographies matter, raising money, like it really is it's a fantastic to try to do it again, and to see that in founders, and just the bravery that it takes to just be a serial founder and keep at it. And that's something that I look for in the people that we invest in as well. Just going on the journey yourself gives you a level of insight that I think there's no other way to get that.
Amen. And I want to put a pin on that thought around the differences between geos, because I want to come back to it. We're in London. We've got a super global audience here. Before I do, JC, you've built a platform-style business in the US that's a unicorn that has many dependencies, marketing, fintech, et cetera. You're now replicating some of this playbook here in Europe. I'd be curious your thoughts on specialization with your investors, and there's a variety of angles to that, and your reflections.
Yeah, I mean, it's totally a different ballgame kind of second time around. You're in a little bit of a luxury position. It's, humbling, like he said, to not have to go and run around Austin and take 100 meetings for a $25,000 check anymore. So that's been nice. But when you have the opportunity, especially like in last year's environment, to basically be able to copy paste your business into a new market in kind of a tough venture environment for everybody, and having that opportunity to then kind of pick and choose who's on the cap table was very interesting, because you get to kind of craft this narrative story with, for example, it was like European fund with fintech expertise that also, because we're moving over here from the States, where we don't have our network of talent anymore that we could just pull from, right? With, specialization in, recruiting. Like, they have an entire platform team that helps us with that, because that was the biggest risk of the business for us, in my view. It wasn't the other things, it was getting the talent in place. In addition to geographic coverage, right? From UK to Central Europe to Southern Europe and beyond. And being able to put those, thread those things together in a way that makes strategic sense for the business, but also helps craft a narrative fundraising story for the future of the business, I think has made a significant impact on why specialization this time around was so fantastic.
I appreciate that. And you've basically taken a US business model and are executing this playbook in other geos. So maybe this brings us to Tom, the point you were highlighting around the differences across geos. I'd be curious your reflections. Building a startup and startup ecosystems with meaningfully less capital in some places, and I think less so London or Germany, but with the less been there, done that, exited founder density. I'd be curious how your advice to founders on fundraising, on LPing, on your investing, changes, modifies in whatever way. Maybe with Tom, since you teed us up on this, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I think from the founding, from the team side, like, there's amazing people everywhere. And it turns out that there's amazing people that cost you a lot less money than they do in San Francisco, in lots of places, it turns out, right? So Berlin, we could build an amazing team for a lot less money, and the quality was still through the roof. And in certain geographies, if you act more like a Silicon Valley kind of a company in how you treat people and the flexibility that you give and the kind of benefits that you give, it like blows people's minds. Like, people in Germany are unprepared for this kind of an environment to exist at a company. It just does not exist. So you have an advantage coming in there with that kind of a mindset to come in and say, like, we're going to do things the way that we did them back in San Francisco, but in Berlin, and like, you can hire basically anybody. Like, almost anyone will come and work for you, because they're just it's unexpected. So you can find these kind of wedges as you're building companies, and as the companies that you invest in, these are things to ask. Like, what wedges are you finding in your geography that allow you to outperform the other traditional companies, these older companies, incumbents, in those sectors, and how do you put those to work? That's one side. On the investment side, really there's nothing like U.S. investment, the U.S. investment scene. Like, coming and talking to VCs, we talked to a bunch of VCs in Germany, in London. It's just a much different landscape, and just much smaller, like much harder to find the kind of investors that we were used to seeing in Silicon Valley. And of course, we shopped it there as well, but we wanted to have a global participation in this was for Chatterbug, the foreign language learning company. So we wanted to have a more global investor base because of the kind of thing that we were doing. And it's just fascinating. Just the expectations of the investors is very different. There's just a different mentality, a different risk tolerance. Out in the valley where we were raising money for GitHub, there's just a lot. There's just a lot of capital to be allocated. And so the attitudes are different. And again, I think a lot of the companies that I've invested in that are global companies, they always end up growing. They'll often start in their local market, but they always come to the US eventually. So I think that's one thing to learn is, like, think from the beginning about how you're going to address the US market. It's just a giant homogenized market that is very easy to access versus the much more fragmented European market. And I think JC probably has some intelligence on that as well.
Yeah, I would love your thoughts. Jens, you look like you're about to jump in.
I think there's a lot of interesting nuance to that question, and a lot has changed in the last 10, 15 years. For one, I mean, there's no single question that access to capital, speed of raising capital in like venture-style setups, the Silicon Valley is the place to be, and there's no question about that, right? I think, though, there is a nuance to industry. Like, are you potentially better off if you're building a crypto company for talent, ecosystem, regulation potentially, if you go to Berlin? Are you better off if you build like sensor technology, hardware plays, and you should go straight to Shenzhen? Might actually be a pretty good idea. Yeah, if you've seen these like hardware houses in Shenzhen, mind fucking blowing. Like, there's interesting cluster building now in various different industries where you might be better off for talent reasons, for regulatory reasons, like to be elsewhere. The other thing that changed certainly is that while the Silicon Valley geographically is obviously great, like you spend a day and you visit like 10, 15 VCs, like within just a parameter of like 10 square kilometers or miles, US venture capital is now configured to invest globally and at scale globally as well. So the good news for entrepreneurs is like, it doesn't actually really matter anymore where exactly you are. If you're doing something freaking good, you're gonna get capital, and that capital can well be from the Silicon Valley as well, right? So I think, fortunately, we're at a place where it's all become like more uniquely accessible, but what I think is interesting is the aspect of cost of labor in particular. A bit, also I think like a level of hustle. I do feel that we're a Silicon Valley average founder who's like, okay, that's how startup lives look like, right? And the entire team behind them, like they're programmed to like, they understand what startup means from A to Z and what journey they're on. And if you go maybe in like, I don't know, in a place in Southeast Asia, we invest as well, it's just like there's no programmatic, like this is how a startup works in every place, in every niche, right? So founders have to actually learn on how do I actually do this whole thing? Like how's that spiel looking like? And there's a learning process to that. But that though gets offset by an incredible amount of hustle, by people that actually want to change not only their own life in ways that other people have not changed, have not been able to change, but also just like to break out with their country to something better, right? This hustle offsets what in the US is a streamlined process. We're gonna build this rocket ship and this is how it works. In some of these like more esoteric and emerging markets, there's a level of hustle that offsets that and a level of street smartness, which is also very exciting.
I love that, and I would say that's often demonstrated by much more capital efficiency in a lot of markets too. JC Lucas, any thoughts on this particular one?
Well, I think the thing that I think of is when I was starting, I think my second business, you know, I was Chicago-based for a lot of this. It was very much, you have to go to San Francisco. Like, you're gonna fail, you have to go to San Francisco. And when we did Kin, it had completely flipped. 2016, 2017, around the time I think you were looking to invest, it was very much, oh, you're not in San Francisco, thank God. Like, because it was just so hard to get people. And I think I agree with what you're saying, that it's really, you can find it anywhere now, right? And the big thing now is finding, I think, now that it's sort of unlocked, the kind of partners that really align with you. You know, both in terms of your investors that really match what you're looking for, have the skills, ability to help you, but then looking at the employees, because I look at that as a huge thing, right? These are the people that are actually building what's going on. And whenever I advise or really help startups that are struggling, lots of times I end up finding folks working with them, and sometimes there's maybe not a fit for the problem they're solving, but lots of times it's startup fit. People that really get what a startup is. Whatever you're doing is important. We don't need the structure. We don't need to put in a big corporate whatever. We have to go finding those people. And wherever you can do that, at this point in the world, go find those people, those investors or those, employees that are gonna make it happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I mean, the thing I keep thinking about is, all the, successful entrepreneurs I've met, or majority of the successful entrepreneurs or unicorn founders I've met or read about in, broadly Europe, typically, like, once they kind of make it here, they'll move to the US. Move their companies, maybe, and have a plan for that because it's a homogenized market, but also just go to the US. And, like, I don't know a lot of other, founders that have, done it in America and then tried to bridge over to Europe. I'm not saying I'm special, I'm just saying I haven't seen a lot of instances of that. But what I find, like, super interesting from a US versus European perspective is a lot to do with mindset, and I don't want to be so naive here to say, like, I can come to Europe and, like, force function change things. But I think that there is something to be said about maybe taking a little bit of a different narrative approach where like I hear a lot about the regulatory environment and how difficult it is, and I'm battling this every day, and I'm not going to deny that it's difficult. But I remember working at Facebook, and I ran all English-speaking business pages globally, and like once I saw the level of scale from like engineering at Facebook, I really realized that like anything is truly possible, and so like I want to own this narrative about regulation in Europe, where I hear like 99% of people are complaining about it. Fine, but like at the end of the day, for founders, like it's just a fun puzzle to solve. Why do we start companies? Because we enjoy challenges and we enjoy solving hard problems, and I can't find a bigger, better, more fun problem to solve than the challenge of regulatory in Europe.
I feel the regulatory problem, though, is sitting on top of something that, like what causes that we regulate so much in Europe. It's like a culture and maybe like a mindset of like, we're going to protect against something, while the US in the first place is still the country of opportunity where like, we let you do to begin with, and we'll see what happens afterwards, right? And I think that mentality in itself is the mentality that's like the turf for amazing appreciation for entrepreneurs, for acceleration of entrepreneurs. So as much as I want entrepreneurs to found here in Europe and this continent here to flourish, but we have a cultural problem to begin with, and regulation is only an expression of that.
Right. Let's bounce off that and take a little bit of a forward-looking lens. And by the way, one of the things you mentioned is like how innovation is going to change in these underfunded areas or perhaps geos. One of the analogies I like the most is what's happened in the auto industry 100 years ago. Like 100 years ago, the capital of innovation was Detroit, and that's where there's hundreds of car companies. And fast forward, what's happened, right? Today, I would argue the most beautiful sports cars are made in Italy, and raw engineering's in Germany, and arguably the capital of electrification is in Austin, Texas, or probably Shenzhen. And so innovation has globalized, but so has best practice. Think just-in-time manufacturing. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. We're here on a panel in Europe thinking about global innovation. How do we get underfunded, critical areas in innovation funded and get support? A lot of the topics that some of the panelists earlier have been talking about and presenting their funds. I'd be curious your reflections there on how to get that movement built.
Can you define what an underfunded area would be, just as an example?
So we've talked about climate, we've talked about biotech, we've talked a little bit about geos like Southeast Asia, et cetera.
So I think that's two good examples. Like I was thinking about the question before, and I think like two areas that I would see is just like, for example, climate, but also defense tech. Yeah. And I think that the thing with both of these is like two aspects to it. Number one, venture capital to begin with was not really configured to do hardware shit to begin with, right? Which like climate tech and like defense tech is to begin with. I think it started with the 2010s and decreasing interest rates that venture capital started to turn around stones in many more industries beyond the core of what software technology was at that point in time. And so venture capital started to become like available for other industries and hardware, which had that notion of like that's long like turnover cycles, long like iteration cycles. So risky, not compatible with what we do, because software engineers like test quickly, drive quickly, like so you have a good like risk, like I'd say like risk profile on that with that opportunity set. Now the second part to it though is that really climate tech like doesn't impact anybody. Like like who's going to buy this? Who's going to do this? Like how can I see how returns work in climate tech? Because like it doesn't solve a problem for anybody right here, right now. And so doesn't defense tech do, right? In the 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7 teens, where we wanted to have great defense companies being born to now help with the crisis that we face. But there was no tank in front of like anybody's house at that point in time, right? Nowhere. It was some of the most peaceful times that we had. So really the shit needs to hit the fan in terms of like, I guess like floods need to happen, and like tanks need to roll on people's front doors so that like actually a problem is being discovered and then can be funded. So I think it is fairly natural for like how venture capital works and the promise that we as LPs give to our, we as like allocators give to our LPs, and like how can we create returns? Like I can predict like the world crisis going on right now.
Spicy takes.
Well, the real question is do the investors actually understand the area, right? Because I know when we were originally doing our business, people didn't understand. And so it was like 200 meetings or something. You'd lead every one, and it was a no, but you felt like you were just teaching them about the entire area. They had no ability to know about it. And I think particularly in especially Silicon Valley, right? The old adage was nobody got fired for hiring IBM, right? And there was a period of time where you probably didn't get fired for investing in an electrical scooter company, right? And so there's a certain amount that you're putting yourself on a limb, and even though our business is risk, there's a lot of investors that look around what everybody else is investing in and what they're talking to their IC, and what they're talking to their LPs about. And if it's not a thing they know about or is cool, then it may not happen.
I think there is a really important element of storytelling and thinking about the future that we want to build. So at Preston-Werner Ventures, I like to really lead with a values-oriented kind of a mission, where what is venture for, really? Venture is to explore the possibilities that are uncertain about the future that we want to build for ourselves and our children, I think. That's how I would define it. So I think a big part of that is just for all of us, all the venture capitalists, to really think about what kind of future it is that we want to build. And I think we all want to build a future that has a climate that we can live in, where we can be safe, where medical procedures are available for us and our children and our loved ones, and where are we going to allocate the capital that is designed to be risky inherently. We're okay with that risk, but what are the stories that we want to come true? That to me is where we can shift allocation, is by telling those stories and convincing people with good stories and good visions of the future what can be made. Now, those things have to be plausibly achievable, and in the climate space, it's hard, but where you see the tides turn is where you get anyone to invest enough money into these sectors that finally you can see that there's profits to be made. And at the end of the day, this is what drives venture capital, is things have to be profitable at the end of the day. But how we get there, I think, can be led by the stories that we believe in. And we ourselves are the ones that can invest in the risky companies so that there can be profit demonstrated to then show the less risk-averse investors that they can come follow on.
I think that's a great final word on the topic. And you guys are all builders of those stories and now investors behind them. And so maybe a big thanks to the panel and to the conversation.
Thank you.